Good morning, all. Today is the 21st of April, Tuesday, and here we are for some more of the explanation on the chapter called Nelson Mandela. By now, I'm sure you have a fair idea of what these few pages talk about. Just to revise, it talks about, Nelson Mandela himself wrote this. It's a part from his own autobiography called Long Walk to Freedom, and it points out two things. Number one is his inaugural speech when he became the president of South Africa, and then goes on to describe what were those things which inspired him, which motivated him to do what he did. As I go on with the discussion, I might look down because I have a few notes, and may also use my hands on the screen wherein I have the text, because I'll be reading out a few lines to you from the text, which you should have either the textbook itself, or you can use the PDF that I'll be and that I have been uploading with each and every Google class. Now, we'll start with page number 19, and we'll start with a question. The question is, at the beginning of his speech, Mandela mentions an extraordinary human disaster under quotations. What does he mean by this? Now, this question asks an extraordinary human disaster. It's very clear that the disaster was the systematic application of the apartheid which the white-skinned rulers of South Africa did. So it was not the practice or racial practices that could have been there, but apartheid as a legal system existed, which bifurcated whites and the blacks and gave way too much of opportunities and rights to the whites, and the blacks in South Africa had a lot of limitations in their lives. The question later asks, what is the glorious human achievement he speaks at the end? It obviously is the abolition of the system of apartheid. Now this question is on page number 19, question number 3. On your notebook you have to write the question and the answer. As we move on page number 20, you will see that there are 6 people whose names are there. Let me read out the paragraph just before that. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. It goes on and on and on. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that it produced the Oliver Tambo's, the Walter, do I pronounce it Sisulus or Sisulus? I'm not really sure. These are South African names, proper nouns, they can vary, and a few other names that are there. Now, do you observe that he mentions the names in plural? The Oliver Tambo's, the Walter Sisuluses, the Chief Luthulis, the Yusuf Dadus. Well, he refers to that it's not just these 6 people, but the whole revolution, the whole movement for independence, for self-rule and removal of apartheid, created not just Nelson Mandela himself, but a lot of other extraordinary freedom fighters. I'm sure you can connect the whole thing with the Indian context. So, these names that he mentions, there's a saying, when things get tough, the tough get going. That's a very positive thing that Nelson Mandela brings out. He says that the bad situations that we had to get into helped bring out such great leaders, men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. Moving on to page number 21. All right, I'll give you a reference. If you follow cricket, try to think about the South African national team. All right, it is a combination of both blacks and whites. Now, on page number 21, there's this paragraph which I have highlighted. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin. This is a very important philosophy of Mandela's life. Alright, you have to understand this part. Now, when someone does something bad to you, it's very natural to hate that person. Mandela himself saw what the white colonial settlers did to his people and did to his country. But he says this line: they can be taught to love, for love comes more natural to the human heart. This philosophy, this idea of Mandela, is a very important takeaway in today's time when there is so much of hate. He says, he goes on in page number 21, the last paragraph, even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards. Even the guards who he says were pushed to our limits. If any of you have checked out the movies which deal with his years in prison, 30, almost 30, they had not just normal prison lives, they were made to work really, really hard, like slaves. But still, he had some amount of belief that, maybe that person is doing wrong, but love comes more naturally. Even that person will do good someday. This belief of Mandela is an important philosophy, is an important lesson that needs to be learned from this text. Right? He's more about firm but gentle. Moving on to the last 2 points, page number 22 and 23. 22 is going to be very important in this case because towards the end of page number 20, moving on to page number 22, there's this paragraph. In life, every man has twin obligations: obligation to his family, parents, wife, children, and he has obligation to his people, community, country. In a civil and human society, every man is able to fulfill those obligations. But then Mandela mentions that he, being a South African, could not fulfill any of his obligations towards his family or towards his society. He could not attain education beyond a certain level. He could not take up a profession of his choice. Even his physical movement in the society outside, places where he goes, places where he sat, met his friends, were greatly limited. So even his social movement was restricted. He cannot do this, he cannot do that. Although he was born free, but he could not live freely. Alright, it's very difficult to understand this problem because we in 2020 we are not used to those limitations. Maybe even in India, pre-independence era was not really similar to this. India didn't have apartheid, but there was a lot of bifurcation of white skin and brown skin people. Now he goes on to say this, I could not live my life. It was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. Just because you're born with a darker skin, he and all the blacks in South Africa were given a very miserable time in society. Now, page number 22 hence is important because it tells us what motivated him, what instigated him to fight for their rights. Moving on to page number 23. This is very important. Again, you can think about the South African cricket team, the combination of people of all colors. And I've already suggested watch the movie Invictus. It has Morgan Freeman, and Nelson Mandela's approach towards more inclusive society comes out in this paragraph. I knew, page number 23, that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. The oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressor. The man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. I hope this line makes sense. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow mindedness. Well, this was Nelson Mandela's broad-mindedness. This was his greatness. He was successful in even liberating his oppressors. This basically are the few ideas in this story. What inspired Mandela to do what he did. His so the questions that he could have was the first question, which I mentioned at the beginning of the text. Apart from that, on page number 24, there are 5 questions which we will proceed to answer in the next 2 to 3 days. So for today, all you have to do is number one, write the question on page number 19 and answer it on your notebook. Number two, write answer number one. Why did such a large number of international leaders attend the inauguration? What did this signify? What did it signify the triumph of? Now I can pretty much guess that some of you have not been following the questions and the explanations. Some may think that okay, the online classes are there, they have been uploaded, I'll check it out in the evening. If you continue with this system, you'll realize later on when the school opens that a lot has already been covered and you'll be really lagging behind. As all of your other teachers have said, and I'm sure your parents are also supporting you, take all these discussions very sincerely. There are 2 questions for today, 2 homework. I'll put them up on WhatsApp. I'll put them up in description with this video in Google Classroom. Answer them, put them down on your notebooks, because I am keeping a record of the homework that I'm giving. Later on, when the school opens, there will be a checking of everything, and obviously, you could be in trouble if you have not completed it. Until then, stay safe.